It was just one of those nights. I had wrapped up early at work and thought, why not surprise Ava? Get home, maybe take her out to dinner. You know, something to change the routine a bit. I had no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. Ava and I had our ups and downs, but we'd been together for 8 years, and I thought we were solid. Hell, I thought I knew everything about her. I pulled up to the house just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. The lights inside were on, normal. I unlocked the door, but something felt off. I can't explain it. I just felt like I was walking into a different reality, like the house was quieter than usual. Ava was supposed to be home by now. She'd mentioned she had a late yoga class, but I thought maybe I'd catch her before she left for that. The front door creaked as I stepped in. I called out, "Ava." No answer. I walked into the living room, figuring maybe she was just in the kitchen or her office. But when I turned the corner into the bedroom, my heart froze. Ava was there. But she wasn't alone. Kyle, our neighbor. The guy who I had trusted like a brother. He was lying there with her, tangled in the sheets. Both of them startled when I stepped in. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. Kyle's eyes went wide as he scrambled to pull the blanket up. But Ava? Ava just sat there, her face flushed, her hair a mess. It was like she had no shame. There wasn't any sound for a moment, just that sickening silence that comes with a realization you can't quite wrap your head around. Then she opened her mouth. "Johnny, it's not what you think." I couldn't breathe. I just stood there, staring, the weight of it all hitting me in waves. "Not what I think?" I asked, my voice shaking. Kyle looked away, pulling himself together. He didn't even have the decency to say anything. And Ava. She just sat there, looking at me like I had walked in on an accident or something. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't anything I recognized. She started, but I couldn't hear it. It was all muffled now. My mind was spinning, the anger bubbling up. "Ava, are you seriously telling me that you've been sleeping with him for the past year?" I spit the words out, each one feeling like it was tearing me apart. "I wasn't," she trailed off, her voice breaking slightly, "but I wasn't buying it. She wasn't sorry. Not even close. I trusted you. I trusted both of you." I turned to Kyle, my face burning with rage. I had known this guy for years. We'd played sports together, had beers together, even helped him move into his house when he first bought it. Now, he was sitting there with my wife like nothing was wrong. Kyle just shrugged, not even meeting my eyes. "Johnny, man. I didn't mean for this to happen. You know how it goes. Sometimes people just..." I didn't let him finish. "How long?" I asked, feeling like my entire body was shaking. "A year," Ava whispered, her voice almost a little too quiet. It was like she was hoping if she said it softly enough, it wouldn't hurt as much. But it did. It was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I just turned and walked out. No more words. No more questions. I didn't want to hear anything else they had to say. I slammed the front door behind me, and for the first time, I felt like I didn't even know who I was anymore. What had just happened? Was it real? It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like my life. But it was. And it was destroying me. I didn't know where to go. I just needed to get out of that house. I couldn't be there, surrounded by the memories of us, the life I thought we had built together. I ended up at the bar down the street, the one I used to go to with Kyle after work. Funny, right? I didn't even want a drink at first. My hands were shaking too much to hold one. But eventually, I grabbed a whiskey, then another. I kept thinking about what had just happened, replaying it in my mind like I was watching some sick movie I couldn't turn off. Ava and Kyle. Kyle and Ava. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe the guy who I'd been there for, the guy who had shared his life with me, was sleeping with my wife. I tried to remind myself that Ava had always been distant, but this was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. I kept staring at the door, waiting for someone to come in, like maybe it was all a mistake, like they'd walk through and tell me this was some kind of misunderstanding. But no one did. The only person I had left was myself. I must have been there for hours, and somewhere in the middle of it all, something snapped inside me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and let them get away with this, with her lying to my face and him just shrugging it off. I had to make them feel it, make them pay for what they'd done to me. I pulled out my phone. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe a picture of Ava and I together to remind me of the good times. Maybe something to ground me. But then, I saw Megan's number. Megan was a coworker, a good one. We'd worked together on a few projects, and we'd always been friendly. I'd noticed how she'd always complimented me on stuff that Ava hadn't really seemed to care about anymore. I guess, looking back, it wasn't hard to see the signs that maybe Megan was just a little too interested. I didn't think twice. I called her. "Johnny. What's up?" Megan's voice was warm, a little concerned, but still casual. I could barely hear my own voice when I spoke. "Hey, you busy tonight?" "Not really. Just hanging out at home." "Why?" I paused. Part of me wondered if this was too much, if it would just make things worse. But that part of me was getting smaller by the second. I needed to hurt Ava. And if I was being honest, I needed someone else to hurt her too. I was thinking about coming over. Maybe we could talk. I could feel my pulse speeding up. "Talk?" she asked, laughing lightly. "That's all you want to do?" I felt a small laugh escape me, bitter and cold. "Yeah, let's just talk." She didn't hesitate. "All right, sounds good. You know where I live, right?" I didn't even think about it anymore. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and headed out of the bar, not even paying for my drink. The drive to Megan's apartment was a blur. My head was spinning. What was I doing? Was this the right thing? Should I even be doing this? But when I pulled into the parking lot, the thought of Ava with Kyle burned through me again, and all those doubts disappeared. I knocked on Megan's door, and when she opened it, the smile on her face was so familiar, like a reminder of what I had lost. We talked. And talked. At first, it was just casual. But soon, I was telling her about everything. About Kyle and Ava. About how it felt to walk in on them like that. How empty I felt. Megan listened. And in the middle of that conversation, the words I never thought I'd say just came out. "Maybe I just need to feel something else," I muttered. It was almost like a confession. She didn't hesitate. Megan leaned in, closer than I expected, and before I knew it, her lips were on mine. It was wrong. I knew it was. But at that moment, I didn't care. I was angry, hurt, and lost. And as much as I hated myself for doing it, I couldn't stop. After that night, Megan and I started talking more. Seeing each other more. I wasn't sure if it was for the right reasons, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to make Ava feel the way I felt. I wasn't going to let her think she could get away with this, with him. But even as I moved forward with my plan, something deep inside me felt like I was just running away from the pain, covering it up with more mistakes. I didn't know how to fix what was broken in me. I just knew that I couldn't stand still. I kept going back to that night. The image of Kyle and Ava tangled in the sheets was burned into my mind. It didn't matter how many drinks I had, how many times I tried to distract myself. Those images, their faces, the way she didn't even look sorry, haunted me. But what really ate at me was how easily they had betrayed me. Kyle, the guy I had trusted, the guy I had helped with everything, and Ava, my wife, the woman I had built my life around, had been sneaking around for over a year. They didn't care. I had been nothing to them but a joke. And now, I had to make sure they felt the weight of their choices. I'd been with Megan for a couple of weeks by now. It wasn't like I was in love with her, but it was something. She wasn't Ava, and that's what I needed. She was easy, there for me when I needed to forget. But as much as I hated myself for using her, it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed them to see what it felt like to have your life turned upside down. I wanted Ava to know what it felt like to have the ground beneath you crumble away, just like she had done to me. So I came up with a plan. A stupid, childish, reckless plan. But at the time, it seemed perfect. I decided I was going to confront Kyle. Not in a fight. Not in anger. No. I was going to get him to confess. I'd get him to admit everything. How long they'd been seeing each other, how it started, what they did. And I was going to record it. I knew Kyle wouldn't be able to resist. He'd been acting like we were still friends, sending me texts like nothing had happened, even inviting me over for beers a few times. I think he felt guilty, but not guilty enough to stop sleeping with my wife. He thought he could just sweep it under the rug, keep it all quiet. But that was about to change. One evening, I sent him a text. "Hey man, want to grab a drink at my place tonight? I got something I want to talk about." He replied almost immediately. "Sure thing, buddy. What's up?" I didn't answer right away. I let the suspense build. He had no idea what was coming. And I didn't even care anymore. The anger had taken over. I felt like I was finally in control, and I couldn't back out now. When Kyle showed up at my door, I made sure everything was set up. I had a bottle of whiskey on the table, glasses, the usual. But I had one more thing. My phone, sitting in the corner, set to record. We chatted for a while, the usual awkward small talk. He kept asking me what was on my mind, but I didn't say anything at first. I just wanted to drag it out. Make him sweat. Finally, I got to it. I leaned back in my chair, my hands shaking with excitement. So man, I've been thinking about what happened. About everything. He looked at me, trying to play it cool. What do you mean? You've been acting weird lately. Is something wrong? I stared at him. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Kyle. Don't play dumb. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting away. The silence between us felt like it was stretching forever. He knew what was coming, but he still didn't want to face it. Finally, he spoke, voice low. Johnny. I'm sorry, all right? I never meant for things to get so out of hand. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. Out of hand? Really? A year of lying to my face is just out of hand to you. I couldn't stop myself. How long was it going on before you even told me? Was I just some fool in your little game? He looked down at his glass, tapping the rim nervously. I could tell he was trying to find the right words. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he muttered, finally looking up at me, a mix of guilt and shame in his eyes. But it did. And I didn't know how to stop it. I leaned forward. This was the moment. The confession I had been waiting for. I want you to tell me everything, I said, keeping my voice steady. Every detail. How long? How did it start? I want the truth, Kyle. He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might back out, but then the words just came tumbling out. It started with little things. We'd talk, hang out, you know? Then one thing led to another, and he cut himself off, but it was too late. He was already deep in it. I didn't need him to finish the sentence. It was clear. He was admitting it, everything I needed. I let him talk, let him dig himself deeper, but all I could think about was what I was going to do with this. And the whole time, I had my phone recording. After he was done, I didn't say a word. I just stood up, walked over to the kitchen, and grabbed a bottle of water. I was trying to steady my hands. I couldn't believe I was doing this, but I couldn't stop now. I turned back to him. I think it's time you paid for what you did. His face paled as the reality of it hit him. What are you talking about, Johnny? You're gonna send this to Ava, I said, showing him the video I had already recorded. And you're gonna send it to your wife too. Tara. I'm done with all the secrets. You'll own this. Kyle just stared at me. His face went from pale to flushed with panic. But he didn't argue. He knew I had him. I emailed the footage to both Ava and Tara. I couldn't even describe how it felt. Part of me felt relief, like the weight of this betrayal was finally lifting. But another part of me just felt hollow, like I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As I hit send, I knew things were about to get ugly, but nothing could prepare me for the fallout that would come next. The next few hours were a blur. I don't even know if I was really thinking straight after hitting send. It felt like the world was slipping from my grip, but at the same time, it felt like I was finally doing something. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just the victim. I wasn't the guy who had to pretend everything was okay while my life slowly fell apart. I wasn't going to let Ava and Kyle get away with it. The thing was, even after I hit send, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, like I had already lost everything, and this stupid revenge was just a way to fill the hole. It didn't make me feel better about what had happened or who I had become, it just made everything uglier. After I sent the videos, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, waiting for something, anything. I didn't know what I was expecting. Ava's frantic messages, Kyle's apology, Tara's anger, but nothing came right away. My mind kept playing through the worst-case scenarios, like some loop that wouldn't stop. I could already picture Ava's face when she saw the footage, her shock, her lies falling apart. But at the same time, I knew she'd try to justify everything. She'd make excuses. She always did. As the hours passed, I started feeling like I had done something wrong. Not because of the affair. Hell no, but because of how low I had gone. I had set a trap for Kyle, manipulated him into confessing, then rubbed it in both their faces. I'd exposed them, yes, but I was left sitting in this dark, empty house. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I thought about Megan. I hadn't texted her, but I kept thinking about the nights I'd spent with her. The times I'd kissed her and convinced myself that somehow, that would make me feel better. But it hadn't. Megan wasn't Ava. And she wasn't my wife. I knew that, but I couldn't help myself. I didn't even know what I was hoping to find anymore. But that was the thing, right? After the betrayal, it wasn't even about the affair anymore. It was about proving something. To them, to myself, to the world even. That I wasn't weak. That I wasn't the fool they thought I was. And the only way I could feel like I was getting even was through this revenge. The quiet was maddening. I hated being alone with my thoughts. But I couldn't leave. I couldn't move. So I stayed there, waiting for the storm to hit, for the texts, the calls, the confrontation. But they didn't come immediately. The silence made everything worse. Then, finally, hours later, the first text came. Ava's name popped up on my screen, and my stomach twisted. It was a message from her, but it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't an apology, or a plea, or even a rage-filled accusation. No, it was something worse. It was a lie. She didn't deny what had happened, but she tried to shift the blame. She told me Kyle had been pressuring her, that she never wanted it to happen, and that she was going to break things off with him. She made it sound like it was all Kyle's fault, like she was some victim in all of this, and I had no idea how to even process that. Here I was, devastated, humiliated, and she was acting like she'd been the one wronged. I could feel my blood start to boil as I read through the message. This was how she'd respond? After everything, after all the lies, she was still trying to manipulate me? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. But I didn't. I just sat there, reading the words again and again, hoping maybe they'd make sense. Hoping they'd be something more than just more of the same. I didn't reply right away. Part of me knew that nothing I said would matter. She was never going to take responsibility for her actions. She was always going to find a way to turn things around, to make herself the victim. And maybe that was what hurt the most, her refusal to own up to what she'd done. But as the night dragged on, more messages came through. Not just from Ava, but from Tara too. Her message was shorter, more direct. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't offer excuses. She just ended things with Kyle. She didn't even want to hear from him anymore. But there was something in her tone that told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't angry with me. She was angry with Kyle. I couldn't help but wonder how much of this she'd known. Had she been suspicious all along? Did she see the signs and just ignore them, like I had? Or had she been completely blindsided, just like I had? Either way, it didn't change what had happened. Nothing could fix what Kyle and Ava had done. As the night wore on, I thought about the chaos that would follow. Kyle would have to face his wife's wrath. And Ava. I didn't even know what to expect from her. I was certain she was already telling herself some version of the story, some way to paint herself as the victim. And if that was what she needed to do to live with herself, then fine. But I knew the truth. I knew what she had done. And Kyle. Well, I wasn't sure how he would handle it. He was always so sure of himself, always so comfortable in his own skin. But now he was exposed. And I knew there would be no going back for him either. But none of this brought me peace. Not the revenge, not the video, not the texts or the anger. I thought it would fix things, that it would make me feel whole again. But in the end, I felt more broken than ever. I didn't know what I was supposed to do now. Where did I go from here? Revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't made me feel any better about what had happened. It hadn't erased the emptiness in my chest, or the image of Ava with Kyle, or the voice inside my head telling me I should have seen it coming. I thought hurting them would make me feel better. But it didn't. All I had now was the mess they'd made. The mess I'd made. And a life I wasn't sure how to put back together. The fallout hit faster than I thought it would. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood knew. I couldn't have imagined it, but somehow, the videos I sent to Ava and Tara got shared around like wildfire. People started whispering the moment I stepped outside. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the glances, the hushed voices, but then I heard it. Did you hear what happened to Johnny and Ava? I wanted to crawl under a rock and never come out. Every time I passed someone, I felt their eyes on me, like they all knew the most private, humiliating thing about my life. As much as I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. I couldn't escape it. I'd done this. I had exposed everything. And now everyone else knew. It felt like my whole world was upside down. I couldn't go anywhere without hearing someone talk about the affair. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure who I hated more, the people who gossiped or the ones who pitted me like I was some kind of tragic hero. Neither made me feel any better. But what really stung was seeing how easily people sided with Kyle. Of course, no one ever said they were on his side, but I could feel it. He was still Mr. Popular around the block. He still had that charm that made people like him, that smile that made you forget who he really was. I wanted to scream every time I saw one of his so-called friends patting him on the back, like nothing had changed. They didn't know the truth, or maybe they didn't care. I couldn't understand how he still had people supporting him. It was like he was still pretending everything was normal, and maybe that's what pissed me off the most. He didn't even seem sorry for what he'd done. If anything, he seemed more concerned with how he looked in all of this. Ava, she was a different story. She kept texting me, calling me. I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her manipulation. I knew what she'd say before she said it. She'd probably cry, tell me how sorry she was, and how Kyle was the one who pushed her into it, how it was all just a huge mistake. She might even try to act like it was all just some weird misunderstanding. I'd been married to her for long enough to know exactly what kind of game she was playing. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. I had Kyle's confession on video. I had her confession too, even though she didn't think she'd given it to me. That was enough for me. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her begging for forgiveness. What she had done was unforgivable. I started to think about what this all meant. For the first time, I realized that the life I'd been living, the life I had worked so hard to build, was gone. It wasn't just the betrayal that had wrecked everything. It was the years I'd spent ignoring the signs, letting things slide, convincing myself that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Ava had checked out long before I ever found out what she was doing. I just hadn't been paying attention. And Kyle. Well, I'd never be able to look at him the same way again. The trust we had was gone. The friendship was gone. Even if he begged me for forgiveness, even if he told me he was sorry 100 times over, it wouldn't matter. He was never going to be the same guy I thought I knew. The betrayal ran too deep for that. In the days that followed, I didn't feel any better. Sure, the neighborhood was talking, but all that did was make me more isolated. The guilt I felt for involving people who didn't need to know the details weighed on me. I had brought this all into the open, but it wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't getting the closure I thought I would. I wasn't feeling any relief. Megan kept reaching out. But every time I thought about her, I just felt nothing. There was no passion, no connection. I had used her to get back at Ava, but I couldn't pretend it was anything more than that. She was just a distraction, and now I was starting to feel like the world was closing in on me. Nothing seemed real anymore. Nothing felt stable. At night, I lay in bed, wide awake. I kept replaying the scenes in my head, the way Ava had looked when I caught her in bed with Kyle, the lies she told me afterward, the way she tried to make herself the victim. I kept hearing Kyle's voice on that recording, the confession that exposed everything. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't escape the weight of it. I didn't know where to go from here. My life had been flipped upside down, and all I had left was the wreckage. I'd tried to destroy them, Ava, Kyle, but in the process, I destroyed myself too. I thought revenge would bring me peace, but it only made everything worse. I wasn't sure what was left of me after all this. The Johnny I was before? He was gone. I thought maybe I'd find some kind of redemption by making them feel what I felt, but in the end, all it did was deepen the hole in my chest. Ava and Kyle were suffering, sure. But so was I. And that was the truth no one had warned me about. Days blurred into one another after everything came crashing down. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier. Every room echoed with silence. I'd spent so many years sharing this space with Ava, filling it with plans, with memories. Now it was just a shell. This place that was supposed to be home felt like a prison. I couldn't even bring myself to look at the spots where we'd laughed, argued, shared moments that were now tainted. Ava and I hadn't spoken. I didn't want to. She tried to reach out. Texts. Voicemails. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I knew exactly what she was going to say. She had no idea how to fix it, and I wasn't about to let her try to convince me everything was fine again. No apology would ever make up for the year of lies, for the betrayal. Not now. Not ever. What stung the most was how easily she shifted into her new version of reality. It was like she'd already moved on in her mind. She acted like it was something that happened, and now she could just sweep it under the rug. It didn't matter that she had torn apart everything we'd built. She had convinced herself that Kyle was just a mistake, that he wasn't the real thing, but that didn't change the fact that she had gone behind my back. She'd chose him over me. And in some ways, I could feel it, the bitterness of that choice lingering in the pit of my stomach every time I thought about it. I hadn't heard from Kyle much. I guess that's what happens when you ruin someone's life and they have to deal with the wreckage. He stayed away, probably trying to avoid facing what he had done. I didn't blame him. If I were in his shoes, I wouldn't want to see me either. But even if he came knocking, I wouldn't have let him back in. There was no going back for either of them. What was left of our friendship, if you could even call it that, was gone, reduced to nothing but a bad memory. I spent my days going through the motions, trying to keep my mind off everything. But that never worked. Every corner I turned, something reminded me of what I'd lost. I started going to the gym again, trying to find some kind of release in the exhaustion of a workout. But even that felt empty. My muscles burned, my heart raced, but the pain didn't feel like it was in my body. The real pain was somewhere deeper, in my chest, twisting like a knife I couldn't pull out. I couldn't stop thinking about the choice I made, to expose them, to send the video. I'd wanted to destroy their lives, make them pay, and for a while, it felt like it worked. Ava and Kyle's world had shattered. Tara had left Kyle, and there was no fixing the mess he had created. Ava's friends started distancing themselves from her. The whispers grew louder. But even as I watched their lives crumble, I realized something. None of it made me feel better. In fact, it only made everything worse. I didn't feel any sense of justice. I didn't feel like I had one. I felt hollow. That's the thing about revenge. It doesn't heal you. It doesn't put things back together. It doesn't give you the closure you think it will. All it does is leave you in the same place you started. Alone, lost, and broken. And that's how I felt. Broken. Completely and utterly broken. I thought maybe I could fix it by getting rid of everything that reminded me of Ava. All those little things, the pictures, the mementos, the small gestures that once meant something. So, I started packing up her things. Her clothes. Her stuff. It felt like I was cleaning out a life I no longer recognized. I threw away old cards, things that had once seemed so important. But no matter what I got rid of, the emptiness remained. It wasn't just the physical reminders, it was everything else. The more I tried to clear away the remnants of Ava, the more I realized how much of my life had been tied to her. All the dreams, all the plans. We had talked about the future so many times. And now the future seemed like a joke. There was no rebuilding, no going back. Not after what she did. And Megan? That was a mess too. I didn't know why I even thought starting something with her would help. She was just a distraction. I used her to get back at Ava, but the guilt crept in the moment I was alone. Megan was a good person. She deserved someone who wasn't just drowning in pain. I didn't want to hurt her, but I wasn't the person I used to be. I had nothing to give her. I kept avoiding her calls, but I knew I couldn't keep doing that forever. Eventually, I'd have to explain why I was pushing her away. Maybe I was afraid of facing the truth. Maybe I was afraid of the mess I had created. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't ready to face any of it. I wasn't ready to look in the mirror and admit that I had done just as much damage as they had. I had let my anger drive me. I had used Megan to hurt Ava. I had destroyed everything. So, I stayed in the silence. The silence of my house. The silence of my thoughts. It was easier that way. There was nothing left to say to anyone. Nothing left to fix. I told myself that eventually, things would settle. That I would heal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. You don't come back from something like this. Not really. And so, I waited. I waited for the pain to fade. For the hurt to go away. But I knew, deep down, that it never would. It's strange how time seems to move in slow motion when you're waiting for something to shift, something to change. I kept thinking that if I just stayed patient long enough, the pain would fade. But the days stretched on and nothing did. I'd wake up every morning with a knot in my stomach, the weight of everything still there, like it was a permanent fixture now. The anger, the betrayal, the emptiness. I didn't want to face it, but I couldn't run from it either. I had been running for so long, hiding in distractions, whether it was work or gym sessions or spending time with people I didn't even care about. Anything to keep from feeling the real hurt. It was easier to bury myself in that, to act like I was fine, but at night, when everything was quiet, I couldn't escape it. I'd lie awake in the dark, wondering what had gone so wrong, what I had missed along the way. How had I let her slip away? How had I been so blind to her distance? The worst part was the realization that even when I had been present, I hadn't been there. Ava and I had been drifting for months, maybe years, and I hadn't noticed. Or maybe I had noticed, but I was too afraid to confront it. Afraid of facing the truth. I thought back to the way she'd always made excuses for things. The way she'd brush off my questions, my concerns. She would smile, give me some vague answer, and I'd just let it slide. She had been pulling away long before I found out about Kyle. But I had been so wrapped up in everything else that I didn't see it for what it was. The guilt hit me hard. I wasn't innocent in all of this. I had been so busy with work, with my own life, that I had neglected her, the woman I had promised to spend forever with. I thought love was enough, but love isn't just about saying the words. It's about being present. It's about paying attention. And I had failed her, just as much as she had failed me. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing could. She had chosen Kyle. She had betrayed me, and in doing so, she had shattered everything. I kept telling myself that revenge had been the right thing. That exposing them had been the only way to get justice. But now, in the quiet of my thoughts, I wasn't so sure anymore. I thought about Tara, Kyle's wife. She had reached out to me a few times, and I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I say to her? She didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess, and I didn't want to be the one to add to her pain. She was just another victim in all this, just like me. We both had to face the reality of people we thought we knew, people we had trusted. It wasn't her fault, and it wasn't mine either. But that didn't make the hurt go away. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Ava and I became unbearable. She tried to reach me again, pleading for some kind of conversation, some way to fix things. But every time I saw her name on my phone, I felt sick to my stomach. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her apologies. I didn't want to hear about how sorry she was. It didn't matter. It wouldn't change anything. There were nights when I considered picking up the phone, calling her, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe we could talk about it. Maybe we could understand each other. But then I'd remember that video, the confession, everything that had been laid bare. And I'd feel the walls come up again. It was easier to shut down, to keep the distance. But even in my isolation, I couldn't escape the truth. I couldn't escape how much I had been hurt by it all. Then one day, Megan reached out again. I'd been ignoring her calls, but I could feel the guilt weighing on me. She deserved better than me, better than what I had become. She didn't deserve to be stuck in this mess, to be dragged into the chaos I had created. I met her at a cafe, a quiet place where we could talk, where no one would overhear. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe I was hoping for some kind of redemption, some relief from the guilt that had built up. But when I saw her, something inside me just crumbled. She was sitting there, waiting for me, her face soft, vulnerable. She hadn't done anything wrong, but here she was, waiting for me to explain myself, waiting for me to acknowledge the mess I dragged her into. I sat down across from her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't know what to say. I had always been the one who knew what to do, what to say, how to handle things. But now I was just a man who had ruined everything. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't fix it. I couldn't go back to the way things were before. Megan looked at me, searching my eyes like she was looking for some kind of answer. But I didn't have one. I didn't have any words to make it right. I didn't have anything to offer her except my broken self. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice hoarse. It felt inadequate, like a poor excuse, but it was all I could give her. "I'm so sorry." She didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, her eyes sad, like she already knew what I was about to say. "I've been lost," I continued, my voice cracking a little. "I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. I used you, Megan. I used you to distract myself, to get back at her. And I'm sorry for that. You didn't deserve any of this." Her expression softened, but there was a distance now. A quiet understanding. "Johnny," she said quietly, "you don't owe me anything. You've been through a lot. But I need to be honest too. I can't keep being part of this. Whatever this is. You need time. You need to figure out who you are again before you can be with anyone." I nodded. I knew she was right. It wasn't fair to keep dragging her into this mess. She was just as much a victim in all of this as I was. She didn't deserve to be stuck in my pain. We sat there for a while in silence, neither of us sure what to say next. I didn't know where to go from here. I didn't know what was next for me, or for anyone. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I didn't feel like I was trying to distract myself. I was just facing the truth. And the truth was that I had to fix myself before I could even think about fixing anything else. Time seemed to lose its grip on me in the weeks that followed. It wasn't that I was numb. It was more like I was just existing, dragging myself from one day to the next, not really living, but not really dead either. I would wake up every morning, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost and everything I still couldn't seem to fix. I spent most of my days avoiding anything that would remind me of what had happened. I worked long hours, buried myself in projects, and kept my head down. I didn't go out much. I didn't really talk to anyone. The neighbors? They saw the way they looked at me, half pity, half judgment, and I couldn't stand it. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't want their "I'm sorry, man" s or their "it'll get better" s. It wouldn't get better. I had ruined everything. Megan didn't reach out again after that cafe meeting. I didn't blame her. I knew I had pushed her too far into my mess. She deserved someone who could give her what she needed. Someone who wasn't drowning in his own mistakes. The quiet in my house was deafening. I still hadn't gotten rid of Ava's things. The clothes she'd left behind, the things she'd once cared about, it felt impossible to touch them. Part of me was afraid to let go of those things, even though I knew I was already holding on to a ghost. Ava wasn't coming back. She had made that clear from the moment she made the choice to be with Kyle. The truth started settling in. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It wasn't about revenge, or proving something to anyone. The hardest truth to face was that I had been part of the problem all along. I had been too wrapped up in my own life, in my own distractions, to see what was happening right in front of me. I wasn't innocent. I had ignored the cracks in our marriage because I didn't want to deal with the discomfort of facing them. I had been just as much of a ghost in that relationship as Ava had been. That's what made it hurt even more. The realization that I wasn't just a victim in this whole thing. I was complicit. One day, out of nowhere, Kyle called me. I almost didn't pick up. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him stew in the mess he'd made for himself. But I didn't. I answered the phone, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was a heavy silence between us, like neither of us knew what to say anymore. I had exposed him, and his life had fallen apart just like mine had. I don't know why I'm calling. Kyle's voice was low, hesitant. I guess I just wanted to say, I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had ruined everything. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, trying to collect my thoughts. I don't know what to say, man, I said finally. You made your choice. I don't know if there's any way to fix it. He sighed heavily. Yeah, I know. I screwed up, Johnny. I hurt Tara. I hurt you. I don't know what to say anymore. It's just a mess. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to tell him how angry I was, how deeply betrayed I felt, but I couldn't find the words. I'd been so focused on making him suffer, on getting back at him for everything he'd done. But hearing him now, hearing the quiet regret in his voice, made something shift inside me. I've been thinking about all of this too, I said slowly. About what happened. About everything. It's not just you. I'm not blaming you entirely. I've been blind to things. To Ava. To us. I didn't see how far we were drifting. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You're right, Kyle said finally. You're not the only one who got lost in all of this. I've been running from my own shit too. I thought I was getting something from Ava that I wasn't getting at home, but I never stopped to think about the fallout. What it would do to everyone around us. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to argue, wanted to lash out at him, but I also knew that we were both just two people trying to make sense of a mess that couldn't be cleaned up. I don't know where we go from here, I said, my voice quiet. I don't think we can fix this. I don't think anything will be the same again. Kyle sighed again. Yeah. I don't think we can fix it either. But maybe we just have to live with it. All of it. And try to move forward. I hung up the phone after that, feeling strangely calm, though the hurt still lingered in the back of my mind. I wasn't sure if I had forgiven Kyle, or even if I ever would. But talking to him, hearing the regret in his voice, it made me realize something important. Holding on to that anger, that resentment, wasn't doing me any good. It wasn't going to heal me. It wasn't going to make anything better. The next few days were quieter. I didn't know what it was. Maybe the conversation with Kyle, maybe the realization that I couldn't keep running from my own mistakes, but something shifted. I started going through Ava's things, one by one. It felt like the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I packed up her clothes, her belongings, everything she had left behind. I wasn't doing it to erase her, but to give myself space to breathe. I needed to start fresh. I needed to find myself again. To stop being the guy who lived in the wreckage of a life that had already burned to the ground. As I packed her things, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for me. I still didn't know what my future looked like. I didn't know if I would ever find peace with what had happened, or if I would ever trust anyone again. But in that moment, I understood that healing had to start with me. I wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but at least now I was ready to try. I had to take ownership of my life. Not the life I had with Ava. Not the life I had with Kyle. But my own. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like a step in the right direction. The days slowly began to feel a little less heavy. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something. I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. The mornings were still hard. I'd wake up and for a few seconds, I'd forget where I was. I'd reach for the side of the bed where Ava used to be, and that familiar ache would hit. But after a while, I'd sit up, shake off the memory, and get on with it. I was starting to realize that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the feeling of having no control over my life. But as time passed, I started to reclaim little pieces of it. The first thing I did was stop avoiding the neighbors. I had been avoiding everyone for so long, afraid of what they might say, how they might look at me. I kept myself locked away, but that wasn't helping. If anything, it was making me feel more isolated. So, one morning, I took a deep breath and walked across the street to Kyle's house. Tara's car was parked in the driveway, and I hesitated for a second. I didn't want to be that guy, the guy who showed up uninvited, the guy who had wrecked everything. But I had to do it. For me. For some kind of closure, even if I wasn't sure what that looked like. Tara opened the door when I knocked. Her face was guarded, but there was a small part of me that could see her hurt. She wasn't angry with me, but I could feel how broken she was. She hadn't deserved any of this. She hadn't deserved to find out the way she did, and I could see it all over her face. The same raw pain I had felt when I first discovered the truth. I didn't come here to make excuses, I said. I just wanted to talk. She looked at me for a long moment before stepping aside. Come in. I followed her into the house, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. It was like we both knew why we were there. To face what had happened. To confront the mess. I told her what I could. I told her how everything had fallen apart. How, in some twisted way, I had become just as much a part of the betrayal as Kyle had. I didn't have any answers for her. I didn't know how to fix it. But I wanted her to know that I hadn't wanted any of this. I had never meant to hurt her. She didn't say much, but she listened. I could see the weight of it all on her face, how much she was still processing. We sat in silence for a while, each of us lost in our own thoughts. But when she finally spoke, her words surprised me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him, she said, her voice tight, but I'm trying to let go of the anger. Because holding on to it isn't going to fix anything. It's just going to keep me stuck. And I'm done being stuck. I didn't have any words to offer her, not really. I wasn't the one who could give her peace. But hearing her say that, it made something shift in me too. I wasn't the only one who was hurting. We were both broken, both trying to find a way to move forward, even if we weren't sure how. I'm sorry, I said again, even though I didn't think words would ever be enough. I wish things had been different. She nodded, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an enemy. I didn't feel like I was the one who had ruined everything. In that moment, I felt like we were just two people, struggling to make sense of a situation that had already torn us apart. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a step toward healing. That evening, I took a long walk. I wasn't sure why, but I needed to clear my head. I found myself down by the lake, a place Ava and I used to go when we needed space. When we first moved into the house, it was one of the first places we'd explored together. I'd forgotten how much I loved the stillness of it. The water was calm, reflecting the setting sun, the trees lining the shore like silent witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded in my life. I sat on a bench by the water, alone with my thoughts. The quiet felt different now. It didn't feel as suffocating as it used to. I could breathe a little easier. I thought about what Tara had said, how holding on to anger was only keeping her stuck. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe that was what I had been doing too. I had been holding on to this burning rage, this sense of injustice, like it was the only thing that could keep me going. But I couldn't keep living that way. I couldn't keep punishing myself, or Kyle, or anyone else, for what had happened. I wasn't going to forget what had been done to me, what I had lost. But maybe I could start finding a way to move past it. Maybe the path forward was about accepting the things I couldn't change. Maybe it was about learning to forgive, not for their sake but for mine. It was like a weight was lifting, just a little, as I sat there by the lake. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this much. I couldn't live in the past anymore. I had to let go of the bitterness that had been eating me alive. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. Slowly. There were moments when I still felt that deep ache in my chest, when the memories of Ava with Kyle flooded back, when I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. But then I'd remember the walk by the lake, the conversation with Tara, and I'd take a deep breath, and I'd keep going. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future would look like, or if I'd ever fully heal. But I knew I was on the right path. The only way forward was through the pain. I wasn't sure if I'd ever find trust again, or love, or peace. But maybe that was okay. Maybe I didn't need to know. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to figure out who I was again. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The days continued to pass. Time, it turns out, doesn't heal everything. It just makes you learn to live with things, one way or another. And as much as I wanted to believe that the pain would eventually fade, I knew that wasn't entirely true. It would always be there, in the background, shifting and changing, like a shadow that I couldn't quite outrun. But I had started to realize something. It wasn't about erasing the past or forgetting what had happened. It was about learning from it. Accepting that I had been hurt in a way that would leave scars. And those scars, they were part of me now. I didn't need to hide them, or try to pretend they didn't exist. I just had to keep living, one day at a time. I'd been going to therapy for a few months now. At first, it felt like an obligation, something I was doing because people told me it would help. But over time, it started to make sense. It wasn't about fixing me, it was about understanding why I had allowed things to happen the way they did. Why I had been so blind to the cracks in my marriage. Why I had let myself become consumed by anger, bitterness, and revenge. And it wasn't just Ava and Kyle I had to confront. It was myself. I had to face the fact that I had been neglecting the parts of me that had mattered. I'd let myself get lost in routines and distractions. I thought love was something you could just keep going through the motions with. But love, real love, is about seeing the person you're with, truly seeing them, and being seen in return. And I hadn't been doing that. Neither had Ava. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't even know if I was ready to move on, or if that would even be possible. But I knew I was taking steps toward something different. Something better. The first time I went out with friends after everything happened, it felt like stepping into another life. They knew bits and pieces of the story, but most of them didn't fully understand what had gone down. I wasn't ready to talk about it with them. Some things just felt too personal to share. But even just being around people, laughing, talking about stupid stuff, without feeling like I was hiding something, or like everyone knew my darkest secret, felt good. It wasn't much, but it was something. And as I sat there with my beer, watching the sunset, I realized I had been so focused on what I had lost, I'd forgotten to appreciate what I still had. A small part of me still hated Ava. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. The betrayal, the lies, it was hard to just let that go. But there was another part of me that recognized something else too. That piece of me that knew she wasn't the person I thought she was, and that she had her own demons, her own reasons for making the choices she did. It didn't excuse anything. It didn't take away the pain. But it made me realize that there was no point in holding on to the anger anymore. It wasn't doing me any good. I didn't want to forgive her. Not yet, anyway. But I could at least stop carrying the weight of her actions on my shoulders. That's what I realized in the weeks that followed. Letting go of the anger wasn't about giving her a pass. It was about freeing myself. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to take a walk. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, just needed to clear my head. I ended up by the lake again. The same spot where I'd sat weeks ago, lost in my thoughts, trying to make sense of the mess I'd found myself in. This time, the air felt different. It wasn't as heavy. The weight of everything hadn't disappeared, but it felt more manageable. Like maybe I could breathe again. I stood by the water for a while, watching the ripples of the lake move in the breeze. And that's when I realized something. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I wasn't waiting for some dramatic moment that would fix everything. The road ahead was still long, still filled with uncertainty. But I wasn't walking it alone anymore. I didn't need to wait for forgiveness. I didn't need to wait for Ava to apologize or Kyle to beg for my forgiveness. What I needed was to forgive myself. For staying in a situation that wasn't right for too long. For turning a blind eye to the cracks. For holding on to anger for so long that it almost consumed me. The anger wasn't a shield anymore. It had been a crutch, and now I was ready to let it go. Months passed, and slowly, the pieces of my life started to fall into place. I was still healing. Hell, I probably always would be, but I was stronger now. More aware of the things I could control, and more willing to let go of the things I couldn't. I didn't talk to Ava much anymore. The last time we spoke, it was civil. Awkward, but civil. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't give it to her. I didn't need to. We both knew that our time together had ended, and that was okay. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry anymore. I had come to terms with it. I started dating again. It wasn't a rush, but it was a step. I wasn't expecting to find love right away, and I wasn't looking for a replacement for what I had with Ava. But it felt good to remember that I was capable of being loved. It felt good to laugh with someone, to feel a connection without the baggage of my past holding me back. I didn't know if anything serious would come of it, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was open to it. I still had a long way to go. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the pain wasn't gone. But I knew one thing for sure. I was in control of my life again. I wasn't defined by what happened. I wasn't defined by my mistakes, or by Ava's betrayal, or by Kyle's selfishness. I was Johnny. Just me. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel like I could be okay again.